Parents buried children. Children buried parents. Plagues, famines, wars that erased entire towns in a single season. And in the middle of all of it, generation after generation, people still found each other, still stood in front of a priest or an elder or a fire and still made the same promise. Not because the world was kind. It wasn't. They made that promise anyway. For most of human history, nobody asked whether marriage was a good idea. You didn't choose it the way you choose a career or a city to live in. It chose you. It arrived the way weather arrives. It was simply what happened to a body once it reached a certain age in a certain village under a certain god. That world is gone. And now, for the first time, millions of people are standing at the edge of a decision their ancestors never had to make, and they are asking a question that would have sounded insane 100 years ago. Should I do this at all? Not who should I marry, not when should I marry, the question underneath the question, the one nobody wants to say out loud at a dinner table. Is the entire institution worth the cost it has always demanded and has simply gotten better at hiding? Because here is the part nobody puts on a wedding invitation. Marriage was never built for your happiness. It was built for the survival of a group that no longer needs you to survive it. It was built for the transfer of land that you probably don't own. It was built for the control of bloodlines that no king is tracking anymore. It was built for a version of human life that ended for most of you decades ago, and you are still being asked to perform the ceremony as if the reasons are intact. They are not intact. The scaffolding fell, only the ritual remains. So when someone tells you marriage is sacred, ask them sacred to whom? Sacred to the church that needed obedient households, sacred to the state that needed taxable units, sacred to the family that needed an heir, sacred to the in-laws who needed control over a bloodline that was never theirs to control. Rarely, if ever, was it sacred to the two people standing inside it. And if you think this is cynicism, look at the comment sections. Look at what people actually say when nobody is performing for a camera. Look at the men who call it the second worst decision a human being can make, right after the first one, which is having a child. Look at the women who say flatly, without flinching, that a wedding ring and a crib are simply two different shaped traps. People are not whispering this anymore. They are typing it in public, under their real names, with their real faces attached, and getting hundreds of likes for saying it. That should disturb you more than it does. Because for thousands of years, the people who suffered inside bad marriages suffered quietly. They suffered behind closed doors, behind smiles at church, behind anniversaries celebrated for an audience that wasn't supposed to see what was actually happening inside the house. Today, they suffer publicly, and what they're telling you is not an isolated complaint. It's a pattern, and patterns are data. And the data says something that the wedding industry will never put in a commercial. A huge number of people who marry will eventually regret it. Not always loudly, not always with a courtroom and a lawyer. Sometimes it's quieter than that, a slow erosion where two people keep sleeping in the same bed long after they've stopped recognizing each other, performing a partnership that exists only on paper and in front of relatives. Staying married and being married are not the same thing. And nobody warns you that you can do the first one for 50 years while the second one died sometime around year 7. So ask yourself something uncomfortable. When your parents or your grandparents told you marriage was beautiful, were they describing their experience or were they describing the only story they were allowed to tell? Because divorce was shameful for most of the last century. Staying was not a sign that the marriage worked. Staying was often the only available option, dressed up afterward as virtue. How many of the marriages you were taught to admire were actually just two people too afraid, too broke, or too trapped by religion and reputation to leave? That question alone should make you sit down for a minute. Now consider the in-laws. Consider the family you don't choose, the one that arrives bundled with the person you do choose, like a tax you didn't know you'd signed up to pay. A mother who never stops mothering her adult son through your marriage. A father who treats your husband like competition instead of a son. Siblings who whisper, parents who interfere, families that never fully release the person you married because releasing them would mean admitting they're not the center of that person's life anymore. People don't just marry a partner, they marry an entire unresolved psychological history that comes preloaded with opinions about how you load a dishwasher. Nobody puts that on the cake topper. And then there's the part that's harder to admit than any in-law ever could be. The part where the danger isn't the family outside the marriage, it's the two people inside it. Because marriage doesn't just expose you to another person's love, it exposes you to another person's worst day repeated for decades. Their resentment when they're tired, their cruelty when they're scared, their silence when they're disappointed in who you've become and too cowardly to say it directly, so instead it leaks out sideways in small comments about your weight, your job, your mother, your failures for years until you stop noticing it's happening because it's simply the weather of your own home now. People don't usually marry monsters. They marry decent, flawed humans who, over enough time, under enough stress, with enough proximity, become capable of saying things to each other that they would never say to a stranger. Familiarity doesn't just breed comfort, it removes the social breaks that keep most people civil. Strangers are polite to each other because they have to be. Spouses eventually stop having to be anything. So here's a brutal question. Are you marrying a person, or are you marrying a future version of that person that hasn't been created yet, shaped by every disappointment, every financial fight, every miscarriage of expectations you can't currently see coming? Because that future version is who you'll actually be living with in 20 years, not the person at the altar, the person stress built. And then there's children, which the comment section seemed to understand with a clarity most wedding planners refuse to touch. If marriage is a gamble, having children inside that gamble is doubling down with someone else's life as the stake. You are not just risking your own years, you are creating a consciousness that did not ask to be created and handing it as a starting gift the exact instability that you and your spouse haven't resolved between yourselves. Children raised in households that look fine from the outside and feel like a slow leak from the inside don't just survive that, they carry it. They marry it into their own relationships 20 years later, convinced they're choosing freely, while quietly repeating a script written by two people who never agreed on a single thing except staying for appearances. That is the part that should actually keep you up at night. Not whether marriage will make you unhappy, whether your unhappiness has an expiration date, or whether it gets exported, fully formed into a person who can't yet consent to inheriting it. And here's another question nobody wants asked at the engagement party. Why now? Why this person at this exact moment, in a culture that has never offered fewer real reasons to marry and more reasons to perform it anyway? You don't need a husband for income. You don't need a wife for children. You don't need a ring for sex or companionship or a roof over your head. Every practical justification that once made marriage necessary has quietly disappeared, and yet the wedding industry has never been larger, never more expensive, and never more photographed. People aren't getting married because they need to. They're getting married because they're terrified of being the one person at the table who didn't. Ask yourself honestly how much of the decision is about the relationship and how much of it is about the optics, the photos, the validation, the relief of finally checking a box that everyone around you has been silently grading you on since you turned 25. How many proposals happen not because two people reached some undeniable certainty, but because the relationship had simply lasted long enough that not proposing started to feel like an admission of failure? That is not love making the decision. That is fear of judgment wearing love's clothing. And consider the math nobody brings up at the bachelor party. Roughly 4 in 10 marriages end in divorce in country after country, and that number doesn't even count the marriages that survive on paper while dying in every way that matters. The ones where two people stop touching each other, stop talking past logistics, and simply coexist as roommates with a shared surname and a mortgage. If you ran any other venture with those odds, a business, an investment, a surgery, you would call it reckless. We call it romantic. So why does anyone still do this? Because underneath all of it, there's something the cynics conveniently leave out when they reduce marriage to nothing but a trap. Being witnessed, being known completely by someone who stays anyway. Not because the law makes it expensive to leave, not because the church will judge them, but because they actually choose you again, on the ordinary, unglamorous days when no one is watching and nothing is being performed. That is rare. It might be one of the rarest things a person can experience, and it cannot be manufactured by a ceremony, a ring, or a guest list of 200 people clapping while you sign a document. The people screaming that marriage ruins lives are not wrong about the risk. They're wrong if they think the risk is the whole story. The truth, the brutal, uncomfortable, inconvenient truth is this: marriage doesn't ruin lives. people ruin marriages, and then marriages, faithfully, without judgment, simply reflect that ruin back at full volume, in a house you can't easily leave, in front of children who can't unsee it, for years you can't get back. The institution is not the danger, the mirror is the danger. Because a wedding doesn't change who two people are, it just removes the easy exits and forces both of them to look directly at what they actually built, with nowhere left to hide from it. So before you ask whether you should get married, ask a harder question first. Who are you, specifically, without the performance, without the apology, without the version of yourself you present at dinner parties? Because that is the person your spouse will eventually meet. Not the one who proposed, the one who's left after the adrenaline wears off and the daily grind begins doing what it always does, slowly, patiently, stripping away every illusion either of you walked with. If you can't bear to be known that completely, marriage will not save you from yourself. It will simply put a witness in the room while you find that out. And if you can stand being seen without flinching and still choose to stay, then maybe underneath all the brutal math, all the failed statistics, all the comment sections full of people calling it the second worst decision a human can make, there's still something there worth the risk. Not a guarantee, never a guarantee, just a chance. The same chance every generation before you took, blind, in the dark, hoping the person standing across from them was telling the truth. That's it. That's the whole brutal honesty of it. Nobody knows in advance which story they're going to end up living, the beautiful one or the cautionary one typed out in a comment section at 1 a.m, warning strangers not to make the same mistake. You only find out by walking in. Your ancestors buried their children and still chose to stand at that altar again the next season because they never had the luxury of asking if it was worth it. You have that luxury now, so ask it. Ask it honestly with your eyes open, and then decide whether you're brave enough to walk in anyway or honest enough to admit that you're not.